transcendental relationship that we have with our spiritual masters and the acharyas. That our relationship is not necessarily based on physical proximity. Srila Prabhupada, it's quite interesting to note how many times he actually had personal association with his personal spiritual master. Not as many times as other disciples. But Srila Prabhupada often made the statement that never was there a time that I was separate from my spiritual master. So, we assist Srila Prabhupada in this way. But we should also understand that not only did Srila Prabhupada expect us to distribute this knowledge to others, but he also expected us to diligently read his books. You know, it's not that everyone just keeps distributing books and no one ever actually reads them. But the idea is that we have to imbibe the teachings that are presented in these books as well. It's our duty, it's our responsibility. And one of the biggest complaints Prabhupada had about his book distributors is that no one ever actually read his books. He wrote a letter to Rameshwar in 73. And they were talking about the extraordinary scores from the Christmas marathon. And at the end of the whole letter, he said, but the highest realization is to save yourself. He said that the highest realization is to save yourself. He sometimes said that, what if someone on the street asks you, you're distributing books, but have you read those books? What will you say? And if you say, no, I haven't read those books, what will they think of you? In Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's a conversation between Haridas Thakur and Sanatana Goswami. And in that conversation, Sanatana Goswami is glorifying Haridas Thakur. He says, Apana achare kahe, nakare prachar, nakarne prachar, karne achar. He explains that some people in this world, they preach nicely, but they do not behave nicely. They preach nicely, but they do not behave nicely. I'm sure many of us can relate. When we go out and share Krishna consciousness with others, we have a certain persona that we put on. But when we come to the back to the temple, how do we interact with people? How do we interact with the devotees that we're living with? Then he explains that some people, they behave nicely, but they don't preach. So they have all the Vaishnava qualities, but they choose not to extend themselves and share Krishna consciousness with others. So both are good in one sense. But then Sanatana Goswami explains to Haridas Thakur, Achar prachar name karya dui karya tumi sarvaguru tumi achare jagadat sarvya. He explains that, but you Haridas Thakur, you behave nicely and you preach nicely. And because of this, you are the ideal preacher. He explains you have the ability to liberate the entire planet because you have these two qualities. So if we really want to be instruments of compassion, then not only do we have to share this knowledge with others, but we have to also learn to imbibe this knowledge in our own personal lives. Bhaktivedanta Swami, he often speaks about how there's different stages of knowledge. Sambandha, Abhidaya, and Prayojana. Okay, it's fine that we receive knowledge, but we have to also learn to imbibe the knowledge that we're learning in our lives. We have to apply it in our lives. We have to actually kind of contemplate the knowledge that's there in the books and think about different ways that we can imbibe it in our lives. Otherwise, what happens is we can start to live a very kind of like superficial Krishna conscious life. And I'm sure all of us have had that experience where we're performing the ritual of Krishna consciousness, like we've adopted the dress, we've adopted the hairstyle perhaps, we've adopted the language, but there's no substance. See, culture is there to support a higher principle. The lifestyle of Krishna consciousness is there specifically to awaken the dormant Krishna consciousness that's within our lives. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the point. It's kind of like before we came to Krishna consciousness, we had a certain group of social friends, and now we're in Krishna consciousness, we have another social friend, group of social friends. But it's explained in the Padma Purana, Smartavyam Satatam Vishnu, Vishmatavyanajitotit, Sarvavidi Nishadashod, Etalyoreva Kinkaraha. That all the rules and regulations of scriptures have two purposes, simply. That to remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. This is why we have the culture of Krishna consciousness present. Because it's supposed to support this principle. So if we neglect this underlying principle, we're making a big mistake. And so at all times we have to learn to be introspective. And Srila Prabhupada's books, they teach us to do this. Krishna consciousness in one sense is a journey. You know, we come in as conditioned souls. And we have to make, like in Nectar Instructions, it's described how we're Godas. Godas means we're servants of the senses and the mind. And we have to go from being Godas to being Goswamis, which means we're masters of the senses and the mind. But we can only be masters of the senses and the mind by Krishna's grace. So we have to become fully dependent on Krishna. So we have to go from this stage where we have a consciousness which is very materialistic to a consciousness which is based around pleasing Krishna. And this doesn't happen overnight. Imagine you're going from one point, you're on a journey, you're driving from point A to point B. But in that journey there are many stages. If you only know where you begin and where you end, but you don't know what happens in between, then it can be very problematic. So Srila Prabhupada's books, they systematically elevate our consciousness to the perfect stage. And in many of Prabhupada's books, Prabhupada will elaborately describe the various stages of devotional service that we have to go through. And if we ignore to give attention to these things, in one sense we're committing spiritual suicide. Because Prabhupada has painstakingly written these books for our benefit. Prabhupada, you know, he would spend sleepless nights writing these books. And if we can't just take some time to really endeavor to understand these books, then in one sense it's considered somewhat offensive. And specifically as devotees, you know, when we come to Krishna consciousness, the biggest challenge is to overcome the conditionings that we've acquired because of our past actions. And in the scriptures, this is described as a stage of anartha-nivritti. Now, anartha-nivritti, Prabhupada says, is a hard struggle with determination. Because not only are you trying to overcome the conditionings that you've acquired before you came to Krishna consciousness, but you're dealing with conditionings that's been there for lifetimes. You know, we all come with our baggage. And that's what stands between us and Krishna. So we have to learn how to overcome this. It's quite interesting to know. Bhakti Thakur, as you know, there are various stages of devotional service. The first is, anyone know what the first stage is? Shraddha. Shraddha, which means we have some adol shraddha, we have some initial faith. And the second stage? Sadhu Sangha. So after having some initial faith, we decide that we want to make our social circle devotees. And then? Bhajana Kriya, where we make a committed endeavor to perform bhajan. And then? Anartha-nivritti. So, Bhajana Kriya and Anartha-nivritti are described to go on hand in hand. As we perform bhajan, we remove anarthas from our lives. And then comes Nishtha, which means our faith becomes firm. So it's described that this progression from Sadhu Sangha to Nishtha, it's described as like climbing a mountain. I don't know if anyone here has climbed a mountain. I know some devotees at the manor went to Kilimanjaro. It's not an easy climb to the top of Kilimanjaro. But to climb a mountain takes a lot of endeavor. After you get to Nishtha, from Nishtha to Ruchi to Asakti to Bhava to Prem, it's described as going down the mountain.